Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence, celebrating Black History
Mhm.
Month with the Black Excellence Series. I am Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group and proud host of BFE. And today's guest epitomizes Black excellence, specifically in the executive leadership role and in totality, the education ecosystem. I am so honored and happy to have Dr. Kristy Somerville-Midgette. She is the proud superintendent of the Brunswick County Public Schools in Virginia and also serves as the Virginia Association of School Superintendents president. I've had many great I like to say geek out conversations with Dr. Midgette, but I wanted to unwrap Black excellence, specifically in the month of February. So it is my honor to have Dr. Midgette on Voices for Excellence. How are you, Dr. Somerville-Midgette?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Dr. Connor. Just really excited to be here with you this morning. So
Absolutely. It's just a conversation.
I
You
know.
know, we just gonna talk about education stuff. You know how we do, girl. So
I
we
know.
ready to get in it.
We should have recorded yesterday.
Listen to my listeners out there, right? This is why I love Dr. Somerville-Midgette. She gives me a text message just as early in the morning, talking about, hey, can we meet? And I'm like, what do you want to meet for? She's like, we got to have a practice rehearsal of the recording. I'm like, no, we don't. You good, Kristy. She's like, no. We got to get on a Zoom call today. And she gave me three options. That's a true superintendent. So
Look, I appreciate you doing it. Our story in Brunswick I think unique to me. So as I was reviewing the questions, I said, I want to be sure that I'm aligned with what you're looking for. So
well, you lucky there was no football yesterday because it would have been a hard no if there was any case. But
yeah.
oh man, but I want the world to see your excellence as a superintendent, how you advocate for equity and excellence, and your instructional prowess on this episode. So, Dr. Midgette, looking forward to it. But the first question, and this is where we're both laughing because we talked about this question extensively. To me, right, very subjective. This is one of the easiest questions, but all the people that participate on VFE, Dr. Midgette, they always say that this is the hardest. So I cannot wait to hear your response to this question. But when leaders across Virginia and the United States unpack Dr. Kristy Somerville-Midgette's leadership signature, what excellence and equity song defines your stance in the ecosystem?
So look, I was telling you, and I tell you, I really struggled. This was the hardest question for me because I put that side of me out here for everyone to see. But to be honest with you, um, it is a rap song. So it is Never Scared by Bone Crusher. And the reason being, and that is for me, it sounds crazy, but it's just basically in this work, and I just think about what I do every day. I come and fight for kids in Brunswick County, and you can't be scared coming into this role. You can't be scared. Like when I got here in 2018, this is a division in crisis. We've made a lot of strides, but at the same time, it hadn't been enough fight for the kids, and the kids didn't know to fight for themselves. And so it is something. There's several mornings that is one of the last songs I listen to before I cross into this county, into the county lines to do the work that we're doing. So that really is my song. Take out the explicit language and stuff like that. But the premise overall, yes, you can't be scared of what we're doing.
Absolutely, Dr.
Yeah.
Somerville-Midgette. I'll tell you, my rationale for laughing is because I know that song specifically, right? I ain't never scared. I ain't never scared, but you are absolutely right. We can't, and when you think about it, when we have to advocate for students, I always used to say this, that superintendents, when they first matriculate and enter into the role, they have that honeymoon stage until they have to make that quote unquote decision. And I'm leaving that abstract because that decision is where you have to, I like to say, underpin your values, your beliefs, and you cannot be scared. You have to be bold to make specific decisions that are student centric in lieu of adult driven. And of course, when you start looking at radicalizing or changing various elements within the education model, you can't be scared to make the decisions for families, students, and your community. And Dr. Somerville-Midgette, your leadership signature is definitely aligned to someone that is not scared to make the hard decisions on the premise for kids. And that's why we appreciate you for that. But just to underscore, again, you are the proud superintendent of the Brunswick County Public Schools, but you also serve as the president for the Virginia Association of School Superintendents. Now, in your role as the president for Virginia Association of School Superintendents and the superintendent of the Brunswick County Public Schools, what are some of the persistent issues leaders and learning organizations that emulate the national landscape within Virginia are facing, and how are you addressing them in this two-folded manner from a superintendent lens and a president of a very big and successful association lens? How are you addressing these broad problems in the state of Virginia?
Well, I'll say one of the biggest issues, and I know you're going to touch on it some, but for us, really in Virginia, has been the funding issues. And I don't want to go deep into that, but that's been a lot of our work lately. And then also with us, we've had a very large political spotlight on us with the change in governor a few years ago, and then change in leadership at our Department of Education. A lot of it is our focus has been on Virginia Literacy Act and looking at overall reading scores, looking at our assessments. So a lot of our work, probably in this last 2 years, that's been a major pressing issue for us is how do we compare to students? How do our students compare to students in other states? Well, Virginia, I think every state probably feels this way, but in Virginia, we have always felt like we have our own assessment. We didn't participate in Common Core and other structures that states, our neighboring states, were participating in because we wanted to create our own standards of learning in the Virginia way and the Virginia model. But now we're finding that as our students, we already were facing a little bit of a lag before COVID, but then after COVID, and then as we start to compare to some of our neighbors academically, you can see where Virginia, we put something in place many years ago, maybe about 14, 15 years ago, but then we never adjusted it. We never shifted. And so now our big shift, and one of the most pressing things for us is, and we feel like we're in fast forward mode a little bit, going a little too fast, is our whole accountability system is changing. Our assessments are changing. And so trying to make sure that we can get the teaching staff and the workforce up to the level of where they need to be capacity-wise to be able to address the changes. But then also how we as superintendents, how we're adjusting to the change right now, because I was on a committee, House Bill 585 committee, where we were looking at our accountability system. And before, assessment and accountability were all lumped together. And so if you ever just get bored, want to go to the Virginia Department of Ed website, you can check it out, but it's all together. So now we're looking at a whole new accountability system that we're trying to adjust, and we're working on the one model and we're transitioning to the other. So it's going to cover some students with one model and then the other. I think as I talk to counterparts in other states, the chronic absenteeism piece with students has been something that we really have focused on. We've had our task force in Virginia just came out with recommendations last week of how we can work together and recover students. So I know when I was at a few conferences, national conferences recently, I had an opportunity to chat with some superintendents in other states, and that was an issue for them, was the absenteeism piece. And now I know Virginia, as well as a few other states, are really linking that chronic absenteeism together when they grade us, whether it's our report card that they give in North Carolina or here with our whole accountability system, whether we accredit it or not, or accredit it with conditions. The chronic absenteeism piece has been something that's big there. So I would say those are probably some of the big things that we've talked about, and how we're working through it is really working with legislators and getting out there, working with legislators, our local chambers, different work groups, and all of the department heads, whether it's Virginia Association of School Superintendents, or the School Board Association, or Virginia Education Association. All of the groups are really just working together to see what we can do, particularly for the absenteeism piece, because right now that can be the determining factor between whether or not your school is accredited or accredited with conditions. So you can check every other box, but if you don't check that box, and getting parents involved and getting them engaged to get their students to school, it falls on the school. So the school is 100% accountable for it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Midgette, because I'm just writing down some notes as you were talking, but very, very important. I just gave a workshop presentation that focuses on what I call the inclusive triangle. And the inclusive triangle consists of 3 constituencies: families, students, and communities, right? And when we talk about the inclusive triangle, specifically strategically addressing chronic absenteeism, there has to be that level of intentionality in collaboration with legislators and politicians with regards to policy development to curtail, I like to say, some of these influencing factors, which chronic absenteeism, it can be correlated to many different variables, i.e. poverty, i.e. access, opportunity, that we have to be able to mitigate at an accelerated manner. But I want you just to go in depth. I'm looking at this continuum where there's this level of balance between capacity building and supporting your accountability system, right? I think that there is reciprocity between capacity as well as accountability, because in order to leverage accountability to specific absolute scores or benchmarks, you have to have this strategic approach to building collective capacity. How are you doing that with some of the major shifts that are going on in Virginia right now?
One of the things that we really are focused on, and the capacity building, I am going to link this to having staff that's licensed, staff that's trained, just on a minimal level. So what's happening with us, I think everyone's facing a teaching shortage. Virginia, definitely a major teaching shortage. And then when you look at divisions like Brunswick, we're a small rural school division. So we're, sometimes the salary, the benefits package isn't as attractive. So you may get someone that they have a bachelor's degree, but it's not in education. It's not in the field that they're teaching. And so while we're working to build capacity to teach them how to teach, we have some enrolled in coursework. We go in and the staff here, and we have outside consultants and people come in and work with a lot of our teachers and provide that support for those who are not licensed. And so it's almost where you're teaching these people how to teach, and you work with them how to teach. But at the same time, we still have to make sure that they're teaching the standards and teaching the standards to the level that they need to teach them to. And so that's kind of been our approach of really, we have less hands than we need, I'll be honest. So we do rely a lot on either consultants and outside professional development opportunities to build that capacity there. But we're very, I feel like we're more so at the surface level. We have a lot of, the majority of our teaching staff is either provisionally licensed, which means that they don't have a full license in Virginia. They don't have full certification in the area, or often international teachers that we have to fill vacancies. And then we also have some that are not, they're in long-term sub positions. They're not fully degreed, and they're part of our Grow Your Own program. So we're working on degrees. And so we're, like I said earlier, I always think Brunswick is unique in that our level of building capacity as we move towards that is really just building up our workforce to where they're ready at that level. The majority are at that level that they understand the standards clearly and they can teach them clearly. And so that's where our focus is. And that's why it's a little scary with the shift to the new accountability system. It looks promising, but it always seems to look promising. And we want, the state will push these things and say, hey, this is what we want to see. But the funds don't always support it. And, when you think about and I know we'll get to funding, but the funds don't always support it. So when I look at where we are, it's such inequities when you think about every time there's a new test or there's a new system. And every time, like, for example, standards of learning, there was a time maybe 10 years ago where Brunswick County, and I was in this region, had the top scores in the region for the standards of learning test, which is our state test. But anytime that I've noticed that I'll see where the test will change or they'll keep the test at a certain point, once everyone starts being successful, then it shifts. But almost like it's designed to be a system of winners and losers. That's just my opinion. Because once it shifts, then you see divisions like ours, your small rural school divisions, your majority, minority divisions start to fade off. And then it takes years to get to that point. So as we start to progress and we start to really understand the assessments and progress in whatever that accountability model is, we're the same as another division or some of the others that are maybe more fluent, then what ends up happening is it shifts again. And then you're always in this cycle of kind of playing catch up. You never really catch up.
So it's what you're highlighting is very profound. It's that the continuous change within the accountability system has this residual effect of this continuous exacerbation of the various gaps, even between learning organizations that could be in the same county or very close to each other. Yeah. Wow. And I love how you're advocating, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, with regards to continuous fighting for what equity and excellence continues to look like, even with the shift of the accountability systems and what that model or how to be able to define that model. But this is one of the reasons why you were named the 2022 Region 7 Superintendent of the Year in Virginia because of your continuous advocating for students as well as students in the Brunswick County area and the state overall. But I want to focus on something. I'm sorry?
I have to say Region 8.
Oh, Region 8. Oh, I'm sorry. It was Region 7, but Region 8. Listen.
Look, in Virginia, they will know a Region 8, we're South Side, and I have to represent them because Region 7 is way out west.
Okay, wait. I look at that. I made a mistake. Region 8, but look, who cares? You got Superintendent of the Year. I don't care what that is, right? Region 8 and Superintendent of the Year. Yes, but I want to focus on something, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, where I want to look at this egregious metric where only 1.2% of the superintendents nationally are Black women, okay? And for you to be Superintendent of the Year, Region 8 in Virginia is just absolutely momentous. Now, for my VFE audience, right, what are the strategies? And I want to just move this to a linear scope of you being an African-American woman as a CEO. What are the strategies needed to increase representation with Black and brown women serving in the role as CEO or superintendent? How did you persist? How were you resilient with all of the opposition and pitfalls that you had to encounter to get to where you are and being named Region 8 Superintendent of the Year?
Okay. I would say for me, I would say a lot of it really was being courageous enough to take the next step, taking the risk. Oftentimes I'll speak to other women and it seems like it's that fear of taking that risk, of taking that next step, of what is this going to mean if I take this position? And I think sometimes we wait, and while men you all will jump right in. It's like, hey, I'm qualified for this, even if you only check 3 of the 10 boxes. And I think sometimes with women, and particularly Black women, we're told, and I was told all the time growing up, you're going to have to work harder than somebody else. And I recognize that. And in some cases, I do. At the same time, I knew that if I wanted to move forward, and I never intended to be superintendent, it was just, everything kept progressing. But I was never scared. I was never afraid. I know, right? I was never afraid to just take that risk. So, like, for example, I was assistant principal only a year. And I had a superintendent that I worked for. He said, I'm going to another division. Are you interested? You've helped turn the school around this year. Are you interested in coming with me? Okay. No problem. And it ended up being where I grew up, and he went back there, but I thought I was going to interview for an assistant principal position. And he's like, no, I want you principal, either the middle school or the high school. And they said the high school needed somebody different. They needed something different. And I went in with 1 year of admin experience and was able to pick my team and really rocked it out. And so everything, moved pretty quickly. But I think for other Black women or Black and brown women is being okay taking that risk, but understanding that the work is going to be different. It's going to look a little different for us sometimes. You don't necessarily have to conform, but I do think you have to pick your battles wisely. Because there are going to be times, I know for me, there were times that it was blatant that I was, the discrimination was there. I could be in a meeting, and sometimes I was the only person of color in that meeting. And I could say something, and literally it fell on deaf ears. And then someone beside me could say the exact same thing. I'm like, I just said that. Yeah. And it's like, is that my battle in that moment to say, I just said that? Because inside, yes, I wanted to say, you heard me say that. But not being afraid to be in the room, not being afraid to lend your voice, to understand that you can still be yourself. And when I say that, going to superintendency, I think there's one other young lady now in the state that has locks, but going into it, I had a mentor who shared with me, Kristy, you may want to put your hair up. I'm not really sure how they're going to feel about, you having locks. And this was another person of color, but there was a significant age difference. And so for her, it was, she wanted to protect me. She wanted to make sure that I guess, got in the door.
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to change those aspects of myself. I made sure it was neat. It's always neat. I went in, I did what I need to do. I ended up finalist 2 places. Of course, I'm here. But I think those are really the biggest things. Just being okay, being in a room, being okay, that sometimes you're kind of walking that path alone and everyone doesn't support you. And sometimes there are people who look just like you that don't support you. And it's unfortunate.
Absolutely.
I think I didn't learn was the networking piece, and I will share that. So a lot of times after conferences and meetings, and it may be the dinner after the meeting, and this was some of the best advice that I received to know what's happening and what's going on. And to network and connect with people. But sometimes people want to know that you're a real person. And like you said yesterday, yes, I am very linear. Everything has to be in order. But at the same time, I recognize that I have to be personable. People have to feel like they have some level of connection to me. And I was that person that I go to my sessions, the meetings, I'm going right back to my room. That's it. And then you realize you don't have those connections when there are opportunities. You're not a part of those conversations that people are having. And you can still maintain your level of integrity and be professional, but you still need to be in that environment to connect, because a lot of times the real conversations happen after the meeting. They happen at the dinners. They happen at the socials. And I think sometimes for us as women of color, we have a tendency to not engage. It's like, oh, I'm not going to engage. I'm not going into this event. And, I have colleagues now who say, I'm not going to that. Why do you go to that? Well, I think you have to be engaged and involved and be able to network and connect with others. So those would be sort of my tidbits that I feel like would be helpful as we go to navigate that. But, know where you're going, know what you want, and keep pushing forward, and don't be so prideful that it has to be a certain type of division. So in Virginia, there are 131 school divisions. 82 of those 31 are small and or rural. And I know women of color who are just talented right now. I mean, just super talented, but they're stuck on, it has to be a large division. It has to be a Fairfax. It has to be a Richmond City. It has to be a Henrico. And it doesn't have to be that large division. And understand that sometimes we have to get in the door. It doesn't matter how talented you are and how much of a hard worker you are. It's still, if you look across the state, many, like some, you have sort of anomaly some places, but you have some that they may have been in a division for 20 plus years waiting for that spot to move into that spot. And being okay with, you may have to bounce around a little bit, or you may have to take a division that maybe not be as coveted, but you can always take it and spin it and really make it your own and build, which I feel like we've been able to do here. So
you have definitely done that, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, and in Brunswick, I can tell you that. You make a great point, right? Wherever kids, I look at it from this perspective, wherever kids are, that's a great chance for good leadership to have impact and influence on their lives. But some great, excellent, I like to say, meta themes that you highlighted: being courageous, taking that risk, calculating strategic risks, that I think that we have to continue to, us as men, to be able to support Black and brown women and women in general as they matriculate into the CEO as well as superintendent roles. And then also the impact and the power of the network effect. I think those are all critical meta themes that are integrated, I should say, have this level of integration where they overlap if we want to be able to ensure that we're increasing representation, for one. And I think that more of us in the education ecosystem need to really advocate and push for that as your partners on the side, so that we see rooms that are just, I like to say, very linear, where limited representation is. Because if we truly want to get to this level of equity and excellence, there has to be leaders that represents all, in order to ensure that that we are designing an inclusive model. But Dr. Somerville-Midgette, you have been advocating, I know, at the state level with regards to equitable funding for learning organizations across the state of Virginia. Now, with federal funding support ending at the conclusion of this year, i.e. ESSER, we are anticipating this precipitous slide, or this funding cliff, for learning organizations across the country. I like to call districts learning organizations, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, because again, we want everyone, all of our stakeholders, to have this continuous learning process every day that they're educating our kids. But what strategies can you provide leaders across this country that are advocating for sustained funding in order to continue innovative programs as well as models to mitigate the loss of learning gains from the pandemic that we're still recovering from?
Gotcha. So I would say, and I'm fairly certain just overall, that everyone's, as we face this ESSER's cliff, that was some very, very useful funding. There were several of us who were able to, handle basic needs, transportation needs, things like that for kids. We were able to hire staff that may have been much needed, and that we were hopeful that would continue after ESSER's. My advice would be, I would say for anyone, and then I'll kind of share the Virginia perspective of what we're working on right now, would be for anyone is just really work with your legislators, your local governing bodies that fund you, whether it's city council or chambers, or not chambers, board of supervisors that currently fund you, and really working closely with them. This is budget season, I believe, probably for most of us, and having those conversations. Hopefully we've had those conversations before now, because we knew September 30, 2024 was it with those funds. but working closely with them, being able to present the data of what's working. And that's part of my budget presentation tonight, to show what has worked for us that we've been able to use the ESSER funds for, and what we need to continue, because we don't want to. We were already, facing some challenges academically prior to COVID. And then after COVID, after COVID is still here, but after, school, we were virtual for nearly close to 2 years. Here, we were one of the last divisions that was still virtual in the state, because of concerns with COVID. So I would say those would be the biggest things. I would say, I guess, on a national lens for our colleagues to work on. I know for us in Virginia right now with the funding, we've been working closely with legislators. I submitted comment last week about this, and has spoken about it at least 3 times since General Assembly has been in session. Is we are currently under a staffing funding model. So it's called the Standards of Quality. It's an old staffing model that was in place, that essentially says how much staff you should have to support your students. And with that, it's pretty antiquated, hadn't been updated in maybe 15, 20 years or so. It's still a very old model. And it's all connected to how we're funded is based on staffing that they feel like we should have, based on our average daily membership, meaning the number of kids we actually get state funding for, and then our local composite index, saying your locality's ability to pay. There's so many inequities in this model, because it's so many inequities in the model that they did a JLARC study, and JLARC came in and they actually gave the report to our Department of Education and our Board of Ed last summer, just basically saying that legislators, that what we have in place is currently underfunding Virginia schools. We're very low in teacher salaries. We're low in student per pupil funding. And so some of that push in the recommendation has been, hey, let's look at student-funded formulas, which, for example, our state superintendent is here. She came from Tennessee, and they fund based on students. So they look at whether or not, hey, if that student's in a rural area, you get extra funding for that. If that student has a disability, there's extra funding for that student with that. If that student's deemed at risk. Whereas now, we may have a whole student with a myriad of needs, but you get the same amount per kid. That's it. And so you have to figure out how to still provide all of these services for the children that we have in place. So that's been something that's been a big topic of discussion for the state, and what we've been working with legislators on. Not necessarily saying going to a student-funded formula model, but to at least examine the current model and see what shifts we need to make. Because when they did our re-benchmarking and taking all the ESSER's money out, it looks like, based on the governor's proposed budget, the last proposed budget, and like I said, it's working with the General Assembly now, it looked like we were going to get even less state funds as a whole, most divisions. And so that's kind of been our fight. We know ESSER's money was a one-time thing, but don't take us to levels of where we're getting less than we received pre-pandemic. So
Yeah. And Dr. Midgette, I want to expand on a couple sentiments that you highlighted, right? When we think of this anticipated precipitous slide, i.e. the funding cliff that we talk about with ESSER, I always, when I speak to superintendents, right, they contact me and say, what would be some, or they ask, what are some strategic approaches to be able to continue the innovation programs that they developed with the federal funding they received? Now, what I've been seeing, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, is that there's been an inordinate amount of investment in people in lieu of systems. And I always say the locality is, or even at the state level, is easy to remove or to not rehire people back, but it's very hard to remove instructional and operational systems that are showing an academic or organizational return on investment. So if as a sub question, how do we how do we address that, right? Because if we're going to remove or not fund to support some of these innovative programs, we're actually going back to some of the legacy programs and structures that existed, which now you have this incongruence with the design of the new model we need in education, but reverting back to old practices. What do you say about that, Dr. Somerville-Midgette?
Well, I think I think it's a little bit of both. So for us in Virginia, one of the things with our budget is we've had this thing that's been in place since maybe 2007, 2008 called a support cap. And it was when we went through a recession before. So they put a cap on what they would fund, what the state would fund as far as necessary positions. So this is extra instructional aides. This is, honestly, extra instructional staff, paraprofessionals, instructional staff, social workers, mental health professionals. So it was a cap on it. This is all we're going to give you. So oftentimes, like a division like ours, based on the size in ADM, we may get a 0.5, like how do you get a half a person? But we will fund you for 0.5 full-time employee for mental health. But we may have, we're dealing with a lot of students and even some staff with some mental health issues. And I just use that as an example. So for us, a lot of divisions did go towards people because we were already short with the people.
Yeah.
And sometimes some systems and programs, we can keep that going with some of the federal dollars, but we didn't have an opportunity. We did look at this as an opportunity to get more hands in place. So it's a little bit of both. You're absolutely right. And if this was, I can speak for my region. Probably for the state, many of us did lean more towards people. We did take care of things like we did building renovations and we bought buses and cars and we did all of that. But when it really was about the unfinished learning, due to COVID, we did focus a little bit more on the people piece because we didn't have enough people in the first place. So
and Dr. Somerville-Midgette, that goes right back to leading towards the structure, the formula for funding counties and districts in Virginia. So you talked about a staffing funding model, right? And possibly transitioning into elements or apparatuses of a student-based budgeting model. Now, when I think about just those two, right, staffing model versus a student-based budgeting model, I look at this as more of a two phenomena where staffing is around equality and student-based budgeting is around equity. So the current model is around an equality model, but is it truly meeting the equitable needs of all the learners in Virginia?
no.
It's kind of a sub question, Dr. Somerville-Midgette.
Honestly, no, it's not. So a few years ago, I'm part of a group. It's called COSARS, Coalition of Small Rural Schools. And that was a lot of our push and focus on getting at-risk funding because there was, it was an at-risk add-on. So it's not a required match that counties have to do for us or localities have to do for us. But we wanted to add that on because you had this group of children in divisions like mine that were deemed at risk, and all of your federal dollars, your Title I dollars, all 5 of my schools are Title I schools. So those monies are going to what resources they need, and then also staffing. Like we still pay a lot of staff out of our Title I funds. So that was looking at, hey, how can we add some additional funding there that was going to support where we were? But I've always said, and my concern has been the way the funding model is set up, the students in Brunswick are not at the starting line. And that's always been a concern for me. You know, when I hear people say, oh, I want to be competitive and be in the race. Well, we're not at the starting line because we don't have the resources we need to even start running the race. Right. And sometimes I don't know if, I would say we all know that. Like my board is very supportive and we're all on board. And they actually, my board chair and vice chair have really gotten involved lately in some advocacy work for the division, and meeting with legislators and really putting that information out there. Because for us, our locality doesn't match our at-risk funding. So we leave, that's part of what I'm talking about tonight, fiscal year 23, we left about $2 million. Actually, pull it up. I'll tell you, because I was working on it this morning, but we literally left, $2.9 million on the table in fiscal year 23. We left $3 million on the table for fiscal year 24. And this is the year that we're in. And so it's really hard to move that needle in the way that you like to move it for kids, and particularly kids here, and just the way the funding formula is set up. And something like at-risk shouldn't be required to have a match, because if you have to depend on your children are deemed at risk, so they're in this category, just give the money. But instead of just giving the money, no, your locality now has to match it. So if they don't have the money to match it, then you don't get the money. And so it's the way it's set up, it doesn't make sense. The pot of money is there. So why do I need to match it? If you have it, so basically you're just not going to give it to me. So, you're talking about what, close to $6 million in 2 years that this division has not had. And that's the way our funding model is set up. It's basically certain pots. If your locality will not match it, the state won't give it to you. So where does it go?
Right.
It just, yeah.
And Dr. Unbelievable, Dr. Somerville-Midgette. Unbelievable, and continue to advocate, right? And really, I appreciate your staunch and stark approach to get the resources needed to curtail some of these insidious gaps that we are trying to mitigate, and then also too around capacity and capability building in the context of, as you said, it reaching that pedagogical rigor where conceptual rigor is normalized for your students every day. So thank you for that. We can talk hours about funding structures and how we do that, but you have leveraged many initiatives in the Brunswick County Public Schools, right? From your leadership lens, please, for my listeners and viewers today, define excellence and innovation in the context of being culturally responsive, specifically around instructional systems to achieve the vision of all. What does that look like in your learning organizations so people can adopt and modify the strategies that you're employing?
So I'll start with you. And this was the full admission. This was the one question I struggled with that I appreciated you helped this yesterday.
Absolutely.
I would say, and just kind of give you the, not to keep you here all day, but to kind of give you a little bit of the Brunswick story so that you can understand the background a little bit. And so that we get to where we are. For us, and I'd say my biggest thing, and then I'll work backwards, has been giving our students access to experiences and opportunities that they have. And I would say that would be one of the biggest things. I know when I came in 2018 and coming in as first I'm superintendent, and I'm like, oh, we're going to do all these wonderful, innovative things. And some aspects of the division before you arrive, but sometimes you don't know everything. If it's not publicized, it's not out there. And so for us, it's been a lot of foundation building. There were some serious fiscal issues. I came in July 7th, 2018. First day on the job, found that we were about $948,000 in the whole 7th day of the fiscal year. So we spent a lot of time making those adjustments. We ended the year well, but spent a lot of time doing that. There were some policy issues, several hadn't been updated since 1998. There were some curriculum issues as far as there wasn't a set reading program in place. There was no plan or structure for assessing where students are, where the reading. I think there was a lot of dependency on the standards of learning tests. So it was like, oh, if the students are passing the standards of learning, they must be achieving at high levels, which is not true. which is not true. You can learn, eventually you can learn how to master the test. Oh, you can teach to the test that, math is math, so eventually you can learn how to move towards that. So for us, technology, it was 24 students to every one device. It was just a lot of overall just infrastructure type and operational issues. So we did spend an incredible amount of time really just cleaning up some rubble, but just building a foundation for the students. And one of the biggest things for me is when I say the access to opportunities and experiences, and that we really have leveraged and pushed. Because like I said, any new superintendent, you come in, you want to do all these really cool, innovative things, and you realize that may not be the setup here in this moment, but giving them what they need in this moment. And one of the first conversations I had with a student at the high school when I arrived was, I wanted to meet with different students. And I asked if there was anything, my last question was like, if there's anything I could do to just push a button to make your learning experience, your time here in Brunswick County Public Schools, a million times better, what could I do for you? I could just push this button and make it happen. And, you get the traditional answers, change lunch, blah, blah, blah. That's kids.
Yeah.
But it's always one lady who it really hurt me, because she said, nothing. And I said, you wouldn't change a thing. I said, so that means everything's exactly how you want. And she said, no, but, we kind of make do with what we have. We just don't worry about it. And I said, you just kind of make do. And she was like, yeah, we just kind of make do with what we have. You just don't worry about what you don't have. And that always hurt me, because I looked at her and I told her, because I came in at 40, and I said, wow, at 40 years old, I'm not now, but at that time I was like, I don't want to make. And, I asked her how old she was, and, she's 16. She was 16 at the time. And she was just like, because I was like, honey, how old are you? And she's like 16. And I said, so you good with just making do? You're good if you get nothing else? And she said, yeah, sometimes you just don't get what you want. You can't worry about it. That is such a horrible mindset for anybody, but for a young person to feel that way. And I found that was a lot of what I experienced. So I can't say, and what troubles me is that these are the majority of our students. We're CEP, continuing education, eligibility provision division. So all of our students get free breakfast, free lunch. We have over 80% of our students who are deemed in poverty. Although, with the funding, it says our overall ability to pay as a community is greater. That's not the students that we serve. And when the majority are students that are dealing with not having every resource that they need, and sometimes, I guess, not knowing what resources they need, because you work through what you have to work through. I think that was the most troubling thing. So a lot of our work has been, how do we provide access to opportunities? How do we get exposures for our students, and how do we get them to see and appreciate where they are in Brunswick County? But we really have pushed out opportunities, and we put a lot of money towards like our different organizations and groups, and just travel and just leaving, just seeing what else is out there and getting that experience with them. But a lot of our work has been on how do we build a solid foundation for these students to honestly have the basics when they weren't getting that before. So I know that I'm not providing you anything particularly innovative, but I do feel like those are our first steps. We have a new school coming, renovations, but I mean, because they were in buildings, they still are. We have some issues with the buildings, but the kids were okay with just getting by, or just getting a little. So that was one piece. Another piece, the administrative team and I really looked at our discipline. I found that a lot of our teaching staff were, are people of color, our students, and just how we think about kids is so punitive. It's so, if a kid messes up, it's like there's no grace. we are done. And working through that, we've had some people come in, sometimes somebody from the outside coming in to tell you the same thing we've been saying is always helpful. But looking through that lens and really evaluating how we're working with children. Because I think sometimes if we don't approach things correctly, you can break somebody's spirit. And we just didn't want to do that. So we've put a lot of work, and we work a lot on that. And just looking at even resources across campuses. One of the things I noticed when I first got here, was there was this desire to, so in the county, you have 5 schools, but you have one school in particular that has a greater more diverse student population than the others. Like, you go to the high school and it's predominantly Black and, and some Hispanic. But elementary level, you'll see white, Black, Hispanic. And then as you get to middle school, it starts to fade out. And then it becomes pretty predominantly Black and brown when you get to the high school. Is just even in how we took care of the physical space for kids.
Yeah.
You would see the one campus that was a bit more diverse, that campus, the grass was always cut. The building was always clean. And those little things, they may sound like little things, but they affect the learning environment for the kids. Or you had the teachers at certain schools that never left, so they didn't have the high turnover rates. But your schools where there were more at risk, it was even the mindset here, and we've made a lot of personnel changes at central office, but the mindset for a while was, we're going to staff those schools. This is where people need to be. Well, no, we're going to staff all schools. All of our children need assistance. But the viewpoint was more so, hey, well, you probably don't want to. Somebody was here before. It was like, oh, they don't want to teach over there. They're all our kids. We're going to sell the entire division. You don't sell just certain locations. So it's just been a lot of that, as far as making sure that we're a bit more culturally responsive, and that we're not hurting our kids because maybe we're hurting. I don't know. Whatever. I just always say, whatever they were dealing with in their past. But I've received a lot of, well, I had to suffer through it. Okay, great. But this child doesn't, because it's a child. Give them grace. Let's work with them and try to support them. So,
Dr. Somerville-Midgette, profound. And why I use that word, I use it intentionally, because absolutely you have to build from, this is, more in the lines from a systems theory lens. You have to be able to build the prerequisites, or I like to say the precursor, in order to get to that level of innovation and creativity. And what you described, it was essentially a radical redesign transformation project from an organizational cultural standpoint, i.e. mindset, instructional foundations, resources and systems in place, and overall, in totality, organizational infrastructure. So what you're doing there, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, is just quite remarkable, and I appreciate it. And last question. You made it. Our practice session paid off.
We didn't touch on this question either. So,
But here we go. I can't wait. This is the bonus. I like to say the bonus question. What 3 words do you want our audience today to leave with regarding leadership to achieve all in the AC stage of education?
All right. So this one, I didn't go through it with you, so I'm gonna just go off the top of my head. I guess I would say first, and I'll just say I'll define myself is servant. I really look at it as, I'm here to serve the kids. I've always said to them, I say to the staff, I work for you, and and my goal is to do everything that I can. Whether it be me, my staff, connecting you with wonderful outside resources and people to give you what you need to be successful. So I would say servant. One thing I always say, and it's very old school term, but I've always said to the team is, I know it's said I'm gonna put this together, put a little hyphen. I would say heart condition. You really have to have the right heart for this work, and you have to care about this work. So that's something that's really important, important for me. And then I guess the last would be something I said earlier, courageous. I mean, it's hard work, but it's fun work. It really is. Like, I enjoy it. I'm not going to act like I don't enjoy it. But just courageous enough to do what's right and understand that it may not be the fan favorite. And so, because I want to touch on something. You said honeymoon. I didn't get a honeymoon here. I was like, that wasn't fair. I didn't go around and shake hands and kiss babies. I didn't get a honeymoon here at all.
Like this, Midgette, she said, I didn't get one. I didn't get. I didn't. Oh man, Dr. Somerville-Midgette, I tell you, servant, heart, and courageous. Thank you for all that you do. I know your work personally, intimately, and I can tell the nation as well as our international listeners and viewers that you are a person. You want to talk about transformation. You want to talk about a redesign specialist, very meticulous in the context of how she assesses systems in order to move systems to have impact on students. We have one of the best here, Dr. Kristy Somerville-Midgette. Thank you. If any of my listeners or viewers want to get in contact with you, how would they be able to do that?
Oh gosh. I would guess, do people normally give their Twitter or?
Twitter, right, LinkedIn, work.
Twitter is just Kristy Midgette. That's it for Twitter, capital K, capital M. And then for LinkedIn, my full name, Kristy Somerville-Midgette. And I'm on that.
Right. Give out your home phone number, Kristy, and next thing you know, you get the prank calls, the cell phone, you get the scam calls.
I said, let me pause. Like, what exactly would you like for me to provide?
Oh man, Dr. Kristy Somerville-Midgette, thank you for coming on for VFE, the Black Excellence Series. Happy Black History Month, Dr. Somerville-Midgette.
Thank you. Same to you.
And on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.